Well, good afternoon. Welcome to the fourth and final day of the B&H Wildlife Week. I am happy to be here with a long friend, Ralph Lee Hopkins. We're going to be talking whale tales, all things whaling and whale photography with Ralph today. Many of you know Ralph for his Lindblad expeditions, as well as he is a consummate conservationist, a guide, if I'm not mistaken, Ralph, and an all-around outdoor wildlife photographer. I've had the distinct pleasure of seeing you present, my goodness, Ralph, 60, 70 times in the amount of time we've known each other.
Back a decade, I guess.
Back in the way back when we were all allowed to travel and be across the country. Ralph has a fantastic presentation he put together. He was just out west photographing whales, so these are going to be some great new images. We're going to discuss how he shoots, why he shoots, and what gear he uses. So we have a fun hour-long presentation for you, and I do not want to cut too much more into it, Ralph, so I'll go ahead and let you take control of the screen and begin your presentation.
All right, let's see if I can get this technology to work.
All right.
All right, am I up and running?
You are.
All right, well, hello everyone. I come to you today from Charlotte, North Carolina, where I've been hiding out during the Great Pause, and also for the last 5 years or so after moving here from Santa Fe, New Mexico. Definitely hankering to get out back west, and during this Great Pause, it's been an amazing time of reflection and wanting to get back out there. So when I got the call from good friend Bob Schaefer that he and Greg and others were going out to Monterey to go whale watching, looking for killer whales, although Monterey Bay has humpbacks and Risso's dolphins and a lot of other species, you got to go dress the part. So we're all wearing our whale tails parkas. But this presentation is going to talk about my work following the migration. And when I say following, that means going to Hawaii in the winter. I know that's hard. And I help raise funds for Flip Nicklin. You probably know the Flip Nicklin name, one of the top Nat Geo underwater guys for years, and Flip has a nonprofit called the Whale Trust. And then I go to Alaska with him as well, and we raise money for whale research. So following whales when you're in a boat is not that easy because you're confined, and it's kind of frustrating when you talk about whales. You want to be in the water with them, and there are places in the world you can do that, but mostly I'm going to talk here about topside or working from a boat. In Hawaii, Maui is a very user-friendly place. The first time I went there, I could not believe that within 5 minutes from the dock. Have you been down there, John? Have you been?
I have, not for B&H, and not for just for vacation, but I have been down there.
Yeah, I mean, it's just so user-friendly. The whales are just offshore. And the reason why I'm talking about humpbacks here is that's the main thrust of what the Whale Trust does, but also the humpbacks are the acrobatic whales. They are the true charismatic megafauna. And this is where I joke, in the northern hemisphere, they jump to the right. And in the southern hemisphere, they jump to the left, but that's not really true. So they're very surface active, which means going whale watching with them. But it's not the main thing I do. If you know my work, I've been for the last 32 years working with a company called Lindblad Expeditions, which operates the National Geographic fleet of ships. So I work with National Geographic Expeditions and Lindblad and NatHab and other companies going out to the world's wild places. This is a B&H event, so we've got to talk gear. And I have gone the gamut from using a Brownie down in the lower left. Although I didn't grow up as a photographer, I was more of an athlete. But I did mess around with it in junior high a little bit, the whole darkroom thing. But then I went when I got out west after getting my geology degree, I just fell in love with landscapes, and I got a 4x5. And then when I started traveling on ships around 1990, I went to Pentex. I guess I downsized to a Pentex 645 because I still love those big frames, and then finally moved to 35 millimeter. Whole series of Canon cameras. I mean, I think I had every digital camera that Canon made. I went right down the line as they released them. And then, but I've moved to Olympus. So I got to mention Olympus has been very good to me, and they've been very good to Lindblad on board our ships. We have what we call the B&H locker, and we've got some Canon camera, now all mirrorless cameras. We've got Olympus, a whole suite. Sigma gives us some lenses for guests to try out on board. So everyone's moving mirrorless now. I think that game is over. And you can see its size. Size matters, especially out on the water. And I still don't know how this fine photographer lady can hold that 600 millimeter with her adapter there. But it all fits in this cube for when I travel. Of course, I'm going to pack it a little differently with bubble wrap and things in this cube, and then it all fits into my bag. So I just want to show you what I carry, and, and it's going to vary whether, if I'm just going for whales, like I took 2 camera bodies, 2 lenses out to Monterey. But there's a whole suite of gear that you can now just put on your back if you're strong still. I can't say I've saved weight. I've saved size on the cameras, but now I just carry a little more, 2, sometimes 3 camera bodies, depending on where I'm going. And people always ask, well, you showed us taking it out of the bag. Can you really get it back in the bag? And so here I am putting it back in my butterfly zippered bag, and it works. And the reason, now, Canon was dragging their feet going mirrorless. I mean, I've got to say that I was waiting, begging for that next camera when Olympus came along and offered that deal I couldn't refuse. Compact, lightweight. It's got a 2x crop factor. Now, people say, oh, I want to stay full frame. My answer to that is Olympus is full frame. The sensor's just smaller, and they've engineered it to work with that smaller frame, very high resolution. Weather sealed cameras, which is key working on the water. Image stabilization like I've never seen, 7 stops. And being out on a boat, holding your camera, waiting for the whale to do something, having that stabilization is key. There's also other modes like live composite and pro capture. You can actually, waiting for a breach, have the camera be taking images in the buffer, and it won't record the image until you click the shutter. So you just stay on the water looking out for the whale. The whale breaches through your frame, then you click the shutter and it'll record stills of it's like magic. It's like holding a computer. And of course, the other things like articulating screen, but this is key, the weather sealed nature of those cameras. And I've had it out in pretty good rains and with no issues. The other thing I wanted to mention is, again, things are happening beneath the water, and housings for your big digital cameras are very expensive. And then when you get a new model, they change 2 buttons and you got to get a new housing. Same thing happens with your iPhone housing. However, we're talking with all the bells and whistles and a 6-inch dome port for doing over-unders. It's like $500, $550 of an investment, not a couple grand. So having this underwater housing, because when the whales come close, in most places in the US, you cannot get in the water without special permits. Of course, you can go to Dominica or Tonga or faraway places and swim with whales, which I have done. But you can do what we call in the business the Hail Mary, where you're above and you poke your camera into the water and shoot away. So this is what I've been doing for the last 5 years, going down to what the Whale Tales event that the Whale Trust hosts in Maui, and we do these fundraising photo expeditions, 3 or 4 days on the water, out in a rigid inflatable boat. And Ultimate Whale Watch and other companies, Steve's Whale Watch Rafting, they donate for a very reasonable cost their boats, and we go whale watching for a full week. The Humpback whale, I don't know how many of you out there in Cyberland have been with whales or seen humpbacks, but they're called humpbacks because of that kind of humped dorsal fin. And I mean, these whales are, they weigh tons. I mean, whales are the largest animals on the planet, the blue whale being the largest animal that ever inhabited the planet, bigger than the dinosaurs. The humpbacks, they get up to 50 feet. The females are a little larger than males. And we're talking, 20, 30 tons. And they live our lifespan. 40, 50 years is not uncommon. And they can live up to 80 or 90 years. So these are very long-lived animals. Actually, a bowhead whale had a stone point in one. So they think bowheads might live over 200 years. Those are the ones that live critically endangered up in the Arctic. But they have some very distinguishing characteristics, not only of that hump, but the long pectoral flippers that are a third the length of the body, and then this beautiful fluke, their tail, that's 18 feet wide, and it drips the water, and those are the motions that you want to get when you're photographing. The humpbacks are truly global in their distribution. They migrate. They have one of the longest migrations on the planet, 5,000 miles. And so they go from the Arctic to the Antarctic and points in between. And the ones we want to focus on here is the North Pacific population, and these are very smart animals that have their own culture. So where do they go in the winter when it's dark and not much food up in Alaska? They go to Hawaii. And they go to Hawaii to get in the warm water. And the pregnant females come down to give birth. Somewhere along the way, a birth still has not been photographed. They've come up on births just after, but there's scientific groups, nonprofit groups following the whales, just trying to see the whole birth process. So somewhere along the way, they give birth, and then there's cow-calf pairs down in Maui. And then the other females that are there, they're either trying to attract the males or trying to avoid the males, depending on their mood. And so they get pregnant, and then they all swim back up to Alaska to feed. Again, photographing whales, it's very frustrating because you feel helpless. You're stuck on the surface, and here are these big animals swimming past you and under you and around you or in the distance. And so you want to anticipate the blow. So there are situations that you can get beautiful pictures, and one is when they blow. Trying to get them to blow in sequence like this is a rare event. Usually they're a little out of sequence. And then they arch up. So that's another opportunity to get the distinctive humpback. I love photographing the whales and including backgrounds for where this is. It's hard to say in this case to tell that it is in Hawaii, other than the beautiful blue water. But you'll see when I show some Alaska photos how different the shots are. And then the humpbacks, if they follow the humpback whale protocol, which we found in Monterey Bay, not all the humpbacks fluked up. They will fluke up every time they go for a dive. Not always for a deeper dive, but when they tilt their body and go downward, controlling their buoyancy, and they show their fluke. They show the markings of the underside when they go down. Some go down steeper. And these flukes are very important because the people that study the whales realize that a fluke is like a fingerprint. The pattern on these flukes is unique to each individual whale. So this is how they recognize individuals. And I just love, I don't know about you, but I love, there's some images just scream to be made into black and whites, and this beautiful white tail is one of them. Now, for those of you who are going out whale watching, hopefully at some time, or coming down to Maui for our next event, or coming up to Alaska, or going out there on your own and hooking up, you can do citizen science with these whales. There's a website called happywhale.com that was started by a guy by the name of Ted Cheeseman, with Cheeseman Photo Safaris, and now with Microsoft's AI software, you can join, register, and upload your pictures of whale tails and see if you get a match. And this is really helping to get the population in the world, because there's probably about 80,000 humpbacks in the world, and there's maybe up to 20,000 in this North Pacific population. So this was an unnamed whale that I photographed in Monterey Bay just the other day, and the match that came up was from its breeding grounds down around Puerto Vallarta in Mexico. So this whale goes up to feed in Monterey Bay and then goes down to Mexico, another very smart whale. So when they're chasing females, and the males are chasing females, the males get in groups and are in these competitive pods. Some researchers call them heat runs, where they are just got one thing on their mind, and this is when they're not the friendly giants. They are bashing each other, doing all sorts of antics, almost to the point of drawing blood on with their stove bolts. Those tubercles that are on their upper jaw and lower jaw will actually get bloody. And the females, they say, either try to avoid them, or if they're being ignored, they will lay on their side and slap their pec fin to try to attract the males. And of course, we don't know exactly. This is all interpretation from lots of man hours and scientific hours watching the whales. You can see on the stove bolts on this whale, there's a little pink there, and so that's what I'm talking about when these guys get really bloody, chasing the females, hoping to mate with the whale. And the female or the male may, they get kind of, I should say, they get a little testy with each other. Tail lobbing, and these are the events though that you want, and you've got to be ready. You got to hold the camera just right to be ready for when these events happen at the surface. Now, what's wrong with this picture? Here's a fluking whale, but the white and the identifying marks are on the upper side, so this whale is actually upside down doing this. So who knows what's standing on its head, just waving its fluke. And they're not waving at us. They could care less that there's boats out there. It's all about hormones and finding those females. This was a female that just kind of came up and rolled over near the boat and then rocketing out of the ocean. Can you imagine? I mean, it's quite something. And these are athletic whales. When you can hurl 30 tons of mass completely out of the water. They don't always come completely out of the water. Or in this case, here's a male that is upset. It's not doing a whole breach, but it is going fast. It's either upset at the other males or upset being rejected by the female. But we call it a huffy whale, and their sound is even different when they take their breath. They constrict a little bit and kind of go, or almost trumpet. And here's another one coming. They're not feeding down there. You might see them squeezing water in the feeding grounds, but here, this is just for show, for either, we could say showing off to the female, but usually it's when there's groups of other whales going for the same female, and they'll just try to make these sounds and make water, splash water. The whale, sometimes they call it the Jesus Christ pose, where the lead male will go up and put its pectorals out and try to block the other whales from the female. So there's all sorts of activity that happens. But the sweet moments are with the cow-calf pair. And there are times when the mom and a calf will come over, when they call it mugging a boat. They'll come over and get curious about a boat. They'll hang out with the boat. Sometimes it could be to avoid the males out there that like to chase the females, so they feel safer around the boats. But this is the only shot I've ever had. I mean, look how tiny that calf of the year is. It's the only shot I've ever gotten like this, where the calf is breaching at the same time as mom. And the mom encourages the calf to breach to build up the blood and to get the whale stronger, because this little calf is going to have to swim 5,000 miles to eat the first fish or krill up in Alaska. And the calves get very playful. And I know a lot of photographers will try to avoid having anything in the background. I love getting boats and other things, especially if it gives a sense of place, but also gives a sense of context. Here with the sailboat in the background, this has Maui in the background. But these little calves, they'll come close to the boat, and they'll just start flopping around, kind of like, look at me, look what I can do, and just take a good long look at you. So I mean, these are the moments that, I'm a photographer for, I guess for business and an excuse to travel, but now it's really all about these experiences. And when you know your camera, though, you can be in the moment with the whales and really enjoying it. And when you know your camera, it's just an extension of you, and you're not missing. I mean, something that non-photographers don't understand is that actually being in the moment with your camera, you're almost more in tune to what's happening because you're trying to anticipate. But here's some of the over-unders now, or at least under, of the whales as they come close. So this is shooting. These aren't iPhone shots. I do have a housing still for a Canon camera. But this is them coming up, diving beneath our boat. So you don't know what you're getting when you're shooting these just from a boat. But if you shoot a lot and you kind of rotate your camera around in burst mode, and this is where it's very close. I mean, the flipper of this whale was almost under our boat. This is an iPhone shot of a whale coming up with a woman on the back of the boat looking down. That's kind of a fun shot. Someone just jabbing their iPhone in, probably in a small housing, although the iPhones now it's a brave person that puts it in the water without a housing, but it's better to have a covering for your camera. And then the other thing that some of the guys will do is they'll give you a mask and you can put your head in the water, hang over the boat to see the whales when they're close. And sometimes these encounters last 20, 30 minutes, so everyone gets a shot. This is an example of an over-under with the big dome port. And then I wanted to show this little clip. This is actually from Tonga, taken by Anne's daughter Taylor, a iPhone shot, and I'm in the foreground, and this little calf came and breached 3 times, almost right on top of me. I was in the splash. I never want to be that close to a whale when I'm in the water. Again, that's very intimidating when this little calf, it was playful. It's like, it sees me and it comes over and starts jumping. Beautiful light. Again, I love capturing the background, those wind turbines saying Maui. That's the Haleakala volcano in the background at first light, using the area light. So we usually try to get out just after sunrise, and the boat captains can see. And then just anticipating those moments with the whales. And these are the ones that are hard to get, where the whale's coming at you. I love shots like this. It's hard to anticipate. It happens quickly. Another one where the whale's now leaning over on its back as it's coming towards us. That's Molokai in the background here. So that is not, you can tell having the landscape in the background that's not Alaska. And then the last, let's see, we had to cancel 2021 because of the pandemic, but we did get in the 2020 whale watch outings last year. So yeah, so it was just after that. I think I went to Baja, and then everything shut down in March. So this was February, and it was the year of rainbows. And so can you picture a beautiful breach in the middle of this rainbow? Well, it never happened. We waited and we waited and we waited. There was some activity with the rainbow, and this is where the boat captains, they really know how to drive for the whales. And there's rules about how close you can get. The whales don't know the rules. They can come right over to you. But you move slow and you try to position your boat. And then we did get one breach that did have rainbow in it, which is kind of fun. And then, of course, we stay out to the bitter end, to the great light with the sunset light. And sometimes we'll get back in after dark. So just to review some of the things I've been talking about, I mean, just the tips for the activity. And if you're out on a whale watch, usually the captain, whoever's talking, will talk about, what to anticipate. So I'm always trying to get first, just to nail it, longer zoom, get that fluke shot. So you've got a fluking up whale, just get it as tight a shot as you can, so that you can send that into happywhale.com and get that in the bag. And then you can really relax and start anticipating the motion, trying to get the blow, trying to get the roll of the dorsal fin, trying to get artistic shots of the fluke up dives. It doesn't always have to be tight. It can be really wide with the back, if you have a beautiful background or a sunset. And then, but you've always got to be ready. You can't almost lift your camera fast enough and get it to your eye to get that action that you're hoping to happen, especially a breach, which happens very quickly, because there is actually time to focus on the whale if you're ready. And then shooting underwater if they come to close range, having some kind of a housing. And then as far as settings, you definitely want to be 1,000th of a second or faster. It was pretty bumpy up in Monterey, so I'd be up 2,000th of a second, almost 3,000th of a second. Use that burst mode, just blast, you just got to blast away, either a single point focus or a tight cluster to get it right on the whale. There's nothing more frustrating than getting the wave, 20 feet in front of the whale, and then the whale's soft. And then having a zoom lens where you can be wide, and then when the whale comes up, and you can actually zoom in to get it tighter if you want to while the action's happening. And this I just shot this of Susan the other day, because she's very good. She's very attentive. She's always ready. And so holding that camera just below your eye, you could use a monopod, although on a bouncing boat, you're more stable actually cushioning the motion yourself. But in calm seas, you could actually use a monopod, because it's hard to hold a camera this long like this, but when the action's happening, that's pretty much what you have to do. And then if you look, it's like using binoculars. If you look right at the whale and lift up your camera and start firing, there's a little delay with these mirrorless something, if your camera goes to sleep. So you've got to be pushing buttons as you're lifting it up to your eye, and then you start capturing that quick burst. So there is a method to it. So yeah, so leaving the warm waters of Maui, and the Mai Tais and all that is tough, but the whales do it, and so do a lot of whale researchers, and then they go up to Hawaii, and photographers flock up to Hawaii for other things as well, flock up to Alaska. And so a more specific chart here that I borrowed from a paper showing Hawaii there in those green lines, and there's different feeding grounds. And whales are pretty habitual. The same whales will be seen in certain areas up in Southeast Alaska, for example, that have been studied for years by a guy by the name of Fred Sharp, who did some of the pioneering work on this feeding technique that the humpbacks use. And I mean, what is going on here? Have you ever seen something like this? So first of all, you've got the whales competing with a fishing boat for resources, and we saw that in Monterey Bay as well. Squid fishery, capturing squid that the rhesus dolphins eat. So there's a whole conservation angle to everything that goes on here. But Alaska is a very controlled fishery, strict quotas, strict areas where the fishing can happen, and mostly up there, the whales are going for smaller fish, and so the birds are picking up the pieces. So this is just outside of Glacier Bay, but that area between Juneau and down Chatham Strait, and in all those areas, Petersburg, there's humpbacks, many of those fjords up there. We do get, I should say, distracted. We're up there for the humpbacks, but there's also the killer whales that are along the coast range here in Tungus National Forest. So we will stop for killer whales. We break for any kind of whales. And the killer whales are very interesting because there's two types of, a lot of people call them orca. That's the scientific name. Killer whales has a bad connotation. However, they do have, it's nature. They've got to eat. And the one type of whale called the transient whales that move around more and migrate more, although not everyone knows. Well, we really don't know where they go when they're not where you're seeing them. They eat marine mammals. And they'll also eat other whales. Like in Monterey Bay, they will ambush gray whale mothers and calves swimming north to their feeding grounds, which is something everybody wants to see, but then they weep and they try to wish they could stop it when it happens, but that's what those transients do. And then there's the resident whales that enjoy fish, and so they go for schooling fish. But these humpbacks are there for the schooling fish. And you're in protected waters. It's just so beautiful in Southeast Alaska with the ancient forest, the temperate rainforest up there between the islands and the fjords, all carved by glaciers back in the ice ages. So you've got these beautiful deep fjords just filled with whales in the sea and bears on shore, eagles in the trees. And look how close to shore they are. So the whales, they get in groups. So the same whales, not necessarily the same groups, but certainly they recognize each other. They have a culture, and they will compete for the females down at the feeding or down at the bar in Maui during our winter, and then they'll go up where there's plenty of food, and they'll get in these groups and they'll feed together. Really an interesting life history. But they'll use the shoreline to kind of herd the fish and confine them and feed, and they'll do these lateral lunge feeding techniques where they'll just kind of come up. But the more spectacular method that they use, and we saw some lunge feeding, for example, in Monterey Bay, some vertical single whale just coming up through the fish, or there'll be a lateral lunge. But there'll be a group of whales, and it can be 4 or 5, up to more than a dozen whales that will swim together underwater with one leader that blows bubbles to create a curtain, rising curtain called the bubble net, that will rise to the surface, that'll confuse the fish and confine the fish. And then the trumpeter whale will sound an alarm, and if you have a hydrophone, you can hear it, and it's like, and then they'll all come up through the fish all at once to the surface, mouths agape, fish will be jumping out of the way, and the sardines or anchovies, depending on where you are. And then the birds, of course, come in as well. And so it's a beautiful scene. And if you really get on it, you have many times to do it. It doesn't happen just once, it'll be over and over. And you can actually see the bubbles rising. So you'll first see this kind of circle of bubbles, and that's where then you'll train your lens, focus your lens. So a quick diagram of what's happening under the water. So you can see in the lower left, the caller, the one that's going to signal when it's time. You've got other whales swimming around slowly in a circle. And this has been filmed now. They've actually put cameras on a whale, and you can see what's going on. They've attached cameras, and now there's great drone footage of it. I meant to borrow a picture from the internet of the drone footage. But the bubbles will come up, and then they all come up all at once through the food. And so you can see the baleen plates hanging from the upper lip here, so you can tell which is the upper. And then the throat pleats, those grooves, it's like an accordion. They can expand and just take thousands of gallons of water in with fish, and then they'll squeeze it with their tongue, pushing the water out, and the baleen then will, it's filter feeding, so that squeeze the water out, and the fish then can't go through the baleen, and then they get a big gulp, and they'll just eat tons and tons of fish in the summer. I should mention, when they go to Hawaii, they don't eat. And the females will lose a significant percentage of their body weight, as will the males. But down there, it's all about reproduction. It's not about feeding. And here's another great, interesting image of all the different, so there must be 10 whales here, and you can see the baleen plates as they come up. So it's one of these amazing, this migration and what the whales do. So much of it is hidden from view. If you haven't yet seen Brian Skerry's Disney film, now on Disney Plus, Nat Geo photographer, he spent the last 3 years going around talking about whale culture. He's got a great sequence on the humpbacks and their habits. But it's this you can go and see. You can go up to Juneau, you can get on a boat, and you can take an expedition on the National Geographic fleet. Good shot of the throat pleats. The orange there are barnacles that are unique to the humpback whale, and so they'll have thousands of pounds of barnacles on a large whale. So they're getting a free ride and filtering organisms out of the water. And then, of course, up there, I mean, there's times where they take a break from feeding, or they're very happy, or we don't know why they breach. some say to shed barnacles, to shed things, but you don't really see that, or shed skin. You do see that in Hawaii. After they jump, there'll be skin patches floating on the water. They do it maybe because it's fun, because they can, to stay in shape, but they love to leap. And sometimes when one does it, another one will do it. So you've got to be ready. And there are the whales that were called one-hit wonders. They do it once and everybody misses it because we weren't ready. But the whales that do it repeatedly, like this one did, and this is one of my favorite shots from up there in Southeast, where it's just beautiful water coming off. It's rotating as it's going up, with the forest in the background. Obviously not Hawaii. When you have good light, you can get what's called the rain blow. So the blow gives a rainbow effect, and that's fun also to photograph. And then this shot actually goes back to, was it the D30? No, it might have been the 10D. This goes back many generations of digital camera. And if you've been shooting digital that long, and you shot in RAW, right? So you've got all that original data. It's amazing now what the new software, all the upgrades of Lightroom. So I've been spending time during this great pause going back in to images that I processed years ago and reprocessing them with the new controls. And back in the early days of digital, as you probably did as well, we really tried to keep our ISO low. We were so worried about noise. So in those early days, I rarely shot above 200 or 400, maybe up to 600 ISO to keep the noise low, and shot with 2.8 lenses in these situations. But now, of course, with the modern cameras, it's all about, and the way most of us, or many of us, shoot now, I'm a back button focuser. So when the whale comes up, I will tap it, focus, and then I will not focus as the action happens, because they're going to stay in the same plane of focus. So the camera's not hunting, nothing's going to go awry. And then the camera's in manual, but the ISO's on auto. So I will say, okay, I want to be, let's say, f4, f5.6 at 2,000th of a second. And then I really don't care what the ISO does. It's going to give me the proper exposure. And if it's, like we had a lot of fog and gray skies in Monterey, I'm going to be a little plus. I'm going to add light to light, keep my histogram to the right, keep it bright. When you have the dark water, you might go underexposed. So you can still use exposure compensation, but that's changing ISO. It's not changing your other controls. That's a different way of shooting, but I'm not twiddling a lot of dials in the moment I'm ready. And yeah, and as we wrap up here, I just want to thank all the support and all the groups that I work with, from Lindblad and Nat Geo Expeditions, of course, B&H. Oh, I should have made B&H logo bigger. Olympus. And you can, if you've seen this presentation, you have any questions, or you want to join us on a trip somewhere in the world, there's my information.
That's fantastic. And we'll leave that slide up for a little bit, Ralph, so everyone can take that down. But you have a lot of positive accolades, beautiful, amazing, great information. Thank you. We do have some questions though that I would like to go through. Typically, what focal length are you using, and are you cropping in after your shots with the higher megapixel cameras?
Focal lengths, the best lenses for the whales typically, although you want to have your wide angle just in case they come close, but it's like that 100 to 400 range, 100 to 400 millimeter range is good. And a lot of times you're going to be wider because you don't know where they're going to come up, or you're setting a scene, like I was saying, where you want the whale in the scene, but you also want the landscape and a lot of water around. But it's that 100 to 400. So with the Olympus, I used the 40 to 150, which is an 80 to 300, and then I had their 1.4 extender, and good extenders like a 1.4. It does not degrade the quality of your image at all. Now, as far as cropping, Of course, the true full frame cameras, you can aggressively crop. So there are situations where I'd rather be wide, and a little wider than I'd like, so I can get the whale in the frame, and then I will crop, but not as aggressively as I would like with what it's 50 megapixel cameras now. But and I know that the whale researchers like the high resolution cameras because they're trying, even for a distant whale, they want to get IDs, and so they'll shoot it and crop it, and the high definition is enough, high resolution is enough that they can then send that to Happy Whale and get a good ID on it.
Well, that's a great segue into the next question, talking about the scientist. I know that you have been doing this long enough that it's almost to the point where you could be considered a scientist on this. You've learned so much. The question comes in from Thomas is climate change impacting their migration? For example, are they leaving to Alaska earlier, going to the breeding grounds later, vice versa? Also, are they going further north because of the water is warming?
Well, that's an excellent question, and I would not consider I'm a geologist, so everything that I've learned about whales, I have kind of through osmosis and being around them. The first thing I'm going to say is what I love most about the whales is how much is still unknown, because it remains hidden to us. We don't know their language, even though they sing. We haven't deciphered it. We don't know what they're saying. We study all the life history. And of course, now with drones and all the technology, we're getting much more information to try to, they might as well be aliens from another planet, because it's just that amazing. Their lives are that amazing and that hidden from us. As far as impacts on climate change, from what I understand, it really depends on the species. For example, humpbacks are now off at least most of the stocks. We all wish they were still on the endangered list. But their numbers have been rising since, with the cessation of whaling by most nations. The humpbacks have come back in great numbers, and so overfishing is probably more of an impact on the humpbacks, or overfishing for krill, and that's a big problem in the Southern Ocean, where krill is just being harvested by the megatons. For many different markets, Asian markets, but also our fish oils and krill oil and things like that that are said to be healthy. But a whale like the gray whale is having a hard time because they're bottom feeders, and so they swim up to the Arctic and suck mud and filter out organisms from the mud. And with the warming, we think, or the scientists think, that the gray whales have been very skinny in these last few years. There's a trend toward impact in their feeding grounds, perhaps related to their food, that's related to climate change. So yeah, it's very a difficult thing to draw direct correlations right now with warming and changing, but we're getting more and more data that depending on the whale species. But I would say man caused climate change. We could have that debate, but other activities of man, habitat, overfishing and pollution, and nets like crab pots. There's so many crab pots like landmines in Monterey Bay, and humpbacks get tangled in them all the time. It's probably a bigger impact right now than because the whales could maybe change their behavior and figure out where to go to survive.
Thomas wanted you to know he also got his degree in geology, so you have a fellow geologist.
Another handsome genius, yes.
We also have a question of, have you ever seen a triple breach, mom, baby, and escort?
I'm sure someone has. I have not seen a triple breach. I've seen breaches in succession where mom, calf, and escort went off, but it wasn't, but I'm sure it happens.
Yeah, and it's one of these funny things that we have become accustomed to. I would say, having the distinct opportunity and pleasure to have traveled with you, that there's a level of you seeing things on a regular basis that the vast majority of the attendees will be lucky to see once in their life. So if you have not seen the triple, I don't know that too many other people have, Ralph. Um, that's fantastic. Great presentation. Everybody was absolutely enamored. Nothing but positive comments coming through. And I'm just going back through in the chat to see if there's anything that I overlooked. Once again, for everyone that is here, we do have about 5 more minutes. So if there are any questions that you had regarding any of the images or any of the gear that Ralph spoke about, now is the time to drop it into the Q&A or into the chat. And, I want to go back to one of the things that it was a question, and I did not ask you because you actually touched on it as you were speaking, but the use of monopods and tripods on the boat. And it was really interesting to me, and I did not think about it until you made the comment after having grown up on boats, that the movement of the boat would actually make it more difficult with a monopod because you would just be stuck to whatever that horizon level is. And with that said, how do you balance the day with carrying, even with a lighter weight Olympus? Like you said, it's still not that much lighter. I mean, you're just doing curls every day, all day, to beef up that upper body for that camera.
Well, truth be told, we were out 6 days in Monterey Bay, and I had to skip one day because my back was so wrenched from a rough day that I had to go to a chiropractor. And of course I had like 20 killer whales for 4 hours on that day when I wasn't there. But no, it's definitely hard. And what you can do though with the monopod is it will rest, it'll stay in that position, and then you can lift it when it's time. And it depends on the size of the boat. So like a Zodiac, there's no way to use a monopod. If you're in a small inflatable, you're going to be swinging around, and so. But on larger boats, I'd say where you got 12 to 15 people in a good situation, and it's not really rough seas, a monopod is the way to go. Tripod, forget it. Now Netflix was out there filming a series that's going to be coming out at some point. And it was a pretty amazing setup. They had an IMAX, either a Red or an IMAX camera on a big boom, stabilized boom that would hang over the ship. And then 2 guys are on, trying to, and one guy was looking, I guess, and telling them where to point. So there's new technology now for image stabilization that when you see these films that are just so amazing, they have amazing technology that they're using now to capture these. But for mere mortals like ourselves, we're stuck on board, waiting for the action to happen. And I should say, you don't have to go to the ends of the world to go whale watching. Monterey Bay is an amazing place for killer whales and humpbacks. Of course, Southeast Alaska, out of Juneau, or take one of the Lindblad Nat Geo cruises, expeditions. And Hawaii, of course, sacrifice yourself, go down there, look for whale tails, look up the whaletrust.org and find out when we do it's usually in February. And then Baja California, down around Cabo San Lucas, and then the gray whale lagoons, just amazing places to go see whales.
Yeah, when we started off on the top of the hour, you asked if I had been to Monterey, and I have, like I said, for family vacation. And it was amazing to just be strolling down the beach and you just see whales. It's just something that was mind-boggling to me. So we did have a question regarding, I wouldn't necessarily say workflow, but besides submitting for research, what do you do with your images after you shoot them? Are you selling them for stock? Are they going to Nat Geo? Or are you just cataloging them?
Great question, because that's been shifting. Up until a couple of years ago, they went to the National Geographic Image Collection. It was a library, a stock library for the Nat Geo photographers. And as many as you probably know, Disney, now National Geographic is one of their brands, and they're going in a different direction, so that libraries. But now I submit to superstock.com and designpics.com for stock usage. But if you go on any of these stock sites and click humpback whale, you'll see every shot you've ever seen or haven't seen by great photographers. So that's one use. But my work, especially on the ships, it's for the brochures and those kind of catalogs. Anything unusual, go to the site, either Happy Whale for population and individuals. But things like markings on whales or strandings, scientists can use those, especially in certain areas, as documentation as well for the risks. And my own presentations, and I am, working on a series of books, or a book series called Great Voyages. I thought I'd get farther along during the pause on it, but that's kind of my ultimate project of different areas in the world, not just about whales, but just about being out in the wilds. Because when you're out in the wild around wild animals, whether they're whales or predators, the stakes are raised. You feel very alive, and it enriches your life, being in the moment and seeing that you're just part of this huge, amazing planet. It's very humbling. I mean, if you can make
That's great. I look forward to that. And one thing I did want to touch on, it was a question that came up several times, and you showed an image and you touched on it. And actually, your final image was of the Aquatech housing. But the Aquatech housing that you were using for the iPhone, is called the Axis Go. I just dropped a link into the chat for all of the attendees that are here. And you had the additional dome on attached to it, which is an add-on. One of the things that Ralph and I laughed about prior to getting on is that, it seems as soon as you invest in the housing, then the phone companies come out with the new phone. So I'm in the same boat as you, Ralph. I have one for my old 11, but now I'm on the 12 Pro, so it is not going to work for me. But they're fantastic. I highly recommend them, not only for the in-water use or the over-under that you saw Ralph shot, but they're great for any type of travel that you would do in a very high dust environment and anything like that, where you are actually going to be using your iPhone to photograph. Is very intuitive and an extremely, extremely well-made case.
Yeah, the other kind of point and shoot, aim and create camera, probably the best one I believe on the market that has a fisheye attachment that you can put on wet underwater as well for snorkeling or for whales, is the Olympus Tough 6. And it's also a great macro camera. So
that's great.
Another one to have in your bag.
And we did have a question come up. What are the plans for the future photo trips? So I'm sure you have some information on any workshops you're doing on your website, as well as I am under the impression Lindblad will be kicking off again this year to do the expeditions.
Yeah, I was just told by Brahmer that my website's down right now, and I have not updated my expeditions because things have been a little uncertain. But what's coming up, Lindblad's starting up in Alaska this summer. They'll have 4 ships. There's pent-up demand for at least domestic travel. Myself, I'm going to be doing two of the whale tails for the Whale Trust expeditions out of Juneau in July. I mean, those are fully booked because we book them a year in advance. Actually, the people are coming this year. Wanted to do it last year, but we had to cancel. But the next one for whales, I guess, would be February in Maui for the humpbacks. And then, Antarctica is where I'll also be going later in the year. And my trips with Nat Geo and Lindblad are on either the Nat Geo expedition site or the Lindblad site.
Fantastic. Well, we are wrapping up our Whale Tales talk, and we will drop in before we sign off a link to the Lindblad so that you'll be able to get some more information. Ralph, as always, it's an absolute pleasure to listen to you. It's like a lecture on all of the things that I have heard you done many times, but I always get more information out of each one that you do. Happy to hear that you are traveling again. Next time I'm down in the greater Charlotte area, I will have to give you a buzz and we can have a social distance high five.
Hey, we can get together now.
the vaccine's allowing us to get together, so we can do it.
We'll do it outside, but we can get together now. But I'm going to shift gears. I should have said my next trip's to the volcano in Iceland. I've got to get there. So
got it.
I'm going to sneak away up there soon.
All right. Well, thank you for all of the attendees that are here and joined us today. Please stay on. We're going to throw up a banner that is going to just be a screen grab, and we will have Zach Noyle coming up. And Zach is a Canon Explorer of Light. He is also an Aquatech ambassador, and we will be talking all things water photography. So please stand by. And as always, good seeing you again, Ralph. Look forward to seeing you at Optic.
Roger that. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it.
Bye.